sex? Okay. And what is human sexuality? Okay. These are more basic questions, okay, that one needs to ask. Okay, there was also a question earlier. Is sex identical with gender? Or does gender, uh, can gender be only particularly determined by sex, etc.? Okay. When we talk about uh, anthropologically understanding human sexuality, ito yung question ng pagiging tao. Una, siguro, just clarify, when you talk about sex and gender, they used to be identical, okay, in long tradition that we have always more or less uh, that had been handed down to us in terms of the tradition of wisdom in the past. There has been an identification of sex and gender. If you are a man, you have the biological constitution of a man, your gender should be masculine, isn't it? And that you should be able to act like one, and you should be able to behave like one, and you should be able to get married like one, etc. But and your gender cannot but be otherwise male or uh, masculine. Okay, but there are now discussions that gender actually is more of a social construction. Okay, that gender is not identical or identifiable with sex, and considering that gender is a social construction, okay, it is society that determines the kind of expectations that it has from males, that a male should be like this and should all be like that, etc., etc., and we term it masculine. So masculinity means, having tough, toughness, cerebral, or masculinity means playing with guns, with cars, etc. These are social constructions. Okay, and that if you are a female and you have the sex organ of a woman, okay, then you should be able to function and be identified as a feminine. Okay, that you should be able to characterize according to society a kind of a gentleness and softness, etc., as a woman. Okay, but then there are a lot of people now who are asking questions whether uh, we really allow ourselves to be, uh, uh, in a way, constructed by our society and defined in terms of expectations, or do we hold on to precisely to the old belief, which actually is based on biological determinism? When you say biological determinism, it is your biology, it is your sex actually is what determines your gender. Okay? If you are a man, then psychologically, by psychologically, then you should be able to function as one because that is your particular role in society. So those are important questions that are being raised as uh, in the whole discussion about human sexuality. So when we speak of anthropological understanding of human sexuality, okay, we speak of this in terms of embodied sexuality. Okay, when you talk about sexuality as embodied, you talk about sexuality in terms of sexual faculties and functioning. You talk, for example, of the biological constitution, okay, the sex organ of a woman, for example. I'm not too sure if you're familiar with all of that. I think we were taught already in high school how these things are and how they function. In the minor seminary, of course, the priest would not want to talk about this. I remember one of our priests who already became a priest, and he did not know because he was asking, he had a false conception that a child is made and actually is born through the anus, etc., and all that. Those are very poor conception because the teacher, who was a priest, Spanish teacher, would always explain sexuality in terms of uh, uh, flowers and butterflies. So people were not comfortable talking about such. But I think now we are very much aware of the sexual organs. Okay, when I was much younger, when I was in high school, I thought menstruation happens when the egg of a woman is not fertilized, and the blood that comes out of the woman is actually as a result of an egg that was not fertilized. I didn't have any conception that the egg is actually just very, very small, almost invisible item. And later on, it was only later on that I learned that upon fertility period, the lining, the uteral lining of a woman thickens to, in a way, prepare for the fertilized ovum implant itself on the wall of the uterine, and that it becomes, that becomes the possibility for a fertilized zygote to develop and mature gradually until it is born after 9 months. Okay, those are very, very, very important information that we are now very familiar with. So we're also uh, familiar uh, with all of this. Okay, and for us as mature individuals, we should be able to understand how such, in a way, function in our lives. Okay, that there are such periods. Uh, can we speak of periods for men as well? What do you think? If woman has a cycle or a period every month, they have to have a fertility period. Does do men have the same
Yes,
something like that? Huh? What do you think?
the same.
Yes, yes, Father.
Why do you say that? What's your basis? Mere experience?
No, I think broadly speaking, Father,
What is it? What is the basis?
because when you speak of period, Father, it's a we are labeling for a woman, but for a man, me, my experience sometimes if I don't masturbate, sometimes it's normally come out during nighttime. So it's for me, it's also a cycle. If you don't do it uh, on your hand, it's
So
open. On your hand, it will automatically come out. Especially if, for me, if it's the the testes is already full, it will come out because it will also affect your body.
okay, that's what you call how do you call
Then
that?
Nocturnal, Father.
Nocturnal emission, no? Okay.
Father, we don't have period because we don't have a uterus.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but if I understand, spirit is in terms of a cycle of a regular production of our uh, sex. Would there be time when a man, for example, becomes so hot in the same way that, for example, a woman, okay, a
Yes.
female could have something like that, etc. Some are saying yes, but that's still it depends. I think it's the more psychological makeup that becomes the basis of such studies. Okay, but what I'm saying is when we talk about human sexuality, we cannot talk about this in terms of just big ideas, but it has to be grounded on the reality of how we understand the biological functioning of our human sexuality. Okay. Okay. Second, it is important to note that when we speak of sexuality, it is not about sexual organs only. Actually, sex in reality is in the brain. There is a book, for example, that was published, okay, claiming that sex is on the brain. Our sex, which is a biological functioning, actually is mainly determined by our own uh, functioning of the brain, of the mind. And this is very, very much especially true in our experience. Like, for example, you fill up your brain with things that would trigger, okay, your sexual libidinal needs. It actually is because of what you feed in the brain, okay? So I think that's important to take note of. Sexuality or sex is actually is supposed to be understood as referring to being a man and a woman. Okay, our sex is what makes us either a man or a woman, depending on our own biological constitution. Okay, and such actually becomes the basis for gender differentiation and orientation normally. Okay, that you can make a distinction between how a man thinks and how a woman feels, okay, and how they function and how they actually relate in their lives. When you do marital counseling or prenuptial seminar, in the church, they make a very clear distinction between a man and a woman. And it is important, for example, for a couple to understand the differences. One clear example of difference that I get to hear from those who give a seminar to couples is that they should be able to understand how their own sexual experience happens, and they normally happen very differently. For example, I don't know if you've heard about that. Okay, uh, that man's sexual disposition could be likened to a light. You turn it on, and then you turn it off, suddenly it's off, isn't it? But for woman, no. It could be somehow described in terms of uh, an an iron, or how do you call it? A flat iron. Okay, when you turn it on, it gradually heats up. Okay, when you turn it off, it gradually dies down. And when a couple does not understand that, okay, for example, if a man is done when he has an experience, okay, pours himself out to a woman, and then he forgets that a woman has a different biological process, then he just abandons his wife, who is actually has to be respected in our own biological constitutional processes. Okay, so sometimes even in the biological disposition, there are differences, or the way they think. Generally, they say men think of abstract, very universal, thinking and perspective, while women can get into more detailed, appreciation of the nitty-gritty of certain things. That's why they are very, very good in preparations of many things, because they can look into the details, but men do not pay attention to details. Okay. And you can actually come up with a long line of differences. But of course, as I was saying earlier, are they only product of societal expectations that have been marked in our bodies? Or are they really, in a way, based on our bodily constitution? Considering that women are to bear children, then they should be able to develop a greater sense of sensitivity, because they will have to take care of a child. Okay, that they should be able to, just like their biological constitution is fashioned in such a way that they can actually be mothers. Okay, does that in a way define also their own psyche? So those are questions that are being raised now in society, because there are those who deny that should be the case, because, and that's the reason why later on we will study that some families, you know, are radically against that idea and would only claim that the only difference between a man and a woman is their biological constitution and nothing more than that. Okay. Sexuality as a fundamental capacity to enter into human relationship. Okay. That is another introductory note. That our sexuality is what will enable us to enter into human relationship, because sex and human sexuality is meant to enable us to relate. So sexuality is about relating. Okay, this is because love and many other forms of expressions of love could be done in a bodily way. Then we should be able to understand human sexuality as a way of entering into relationship as a man or as a woman. You understand? So I think from especially you'll see that that seems to be the general orientation of our appreciation of how sexuality or sex should function in our lives. It is always appreciated in terms of eros, okay, erotic relationship that you get drawn out from yourself and be able to get attracted, okay, um, by another human being who is a woman. There is that natural attraction between a man and a woman. Now, if there is another form of attraction, if you're a man and you're attracted to another man, okay, uh, for a long time that has been suspected to be a form of a psychological disease. But no medical professional, even among psychologists, would ever make such claim anymore. It is not a disease. It is not a misplaced or displaced object of our own sexual libidinal attraction. Okay. Again, those are important questions to ask and later on to be settled in the course. Okay. Sexuality also, I think, should be understood as an urge and power within the totality of our human person. Okay? I think no one here can deny that this is one dimension in our life that somehow has a particular force that we need to contain. It's like an animal, no? Uh, that wants to release itself, but you need to be able to tame it and to be able to deal with it in such a way that you can have better control of it in a society that has its own, you know, social arrangements. You cannot just do whatever you like animals. But it is recognized that it is a power, it is a source. And in some culture, it is actually even understood as something that does not only generate possibilities to have children, but it is also a force that enable us to explore many things in our life, that enable us. Yan yung mga chakras natin, ano, the power that you have within us. Okay? So, therefore, if it is an urge and a power within our human, within the totality of our human experience, okay, uh, it is therefore important that we are able to see this uh, as something that we need to manage. But at the same time, it is all also not fully identified with our own total human definition as our human person. I have guided people with homosexual orientation, and at the beginning, they actually hate themselves, and they hardly could function because they're just so focused about that reality which they could not accept in themselves. But what also would lead us to more or less allow them to be liberated from those fears and those concerns is to be able to make them appreciate that is just part of a much bigger totality that they are as a human person. It's just a part. It's not all about you. It's not the whole of you. Okay, and therefore, if it is just a part of who we are, then we should be able to allow it to function accordingly. Now, when we say uh, human sexuality understood anthropologically, psychologically, etc., it's basically meant to be able to make us appreciate our being sexual nature. We're all sexual nature. Okay? And that is important to understand. But it does not mean that just because we are sexual nature, we allow sex to take control over us. Okay? And to precisely define completely and totally ourselves. This brings us to an ethical understanding of sexuality. It brings us to determine how we put human sexuality at the service of our total humanity. Okay? How do we become the best person that we could be given our sexual powers and sexual potentials that we have? The question here that one needs to ask is how do we integrate our being sexual into the totality of human person and within our goal as a human person? I think that's very important to ask. And society precisely has given us, at least in terms of the wisdom of tradition, is has given us on how to manage that and put our human sexuality within the total vision that we have about ourselves as human persons. Okay? A concrete example of this is when I was a formator here at the Paul House many years ago, after coming back from my studies, there was always a question that kept coming up. Should you accept people with homosexual orientation to undergo formation and eventually be ordained priests? What do you think? That's not an easy question to
Yes.
ask. Huh? Who is
I think
saying
yes,
yes?
yes, Father, as long as he's open about himself, he's
Okay,
honest about himself. Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Which
He's willing
means,
to process. He's willing to process.
okay, that's my response too. It depends on how the person is able to integrate his fundamental homosexual orientation to the totality of his person. Okay? So when you do that, then you always have to situate yourself in the reality, for example, that you are a celibate, that you are called to a life of commitment, and that becomes the frame within which you should be able to exercise and deal and manage your sexuality, and that you should be able to integrate it in that way. So, for example, if your orientation is like that, then how do we put that at the service of your own capacity to love people, okay, to serve, okay, to become inventive in your life, etc., in such a way that it will not drag you down, because there is a possibility, okay, that a person of different orientations, heterosexual or homosexual, would would have to deal with his sexuality. Kapag heterosexual ka, hindi mo naman pwede nangangahulugan na, di ba, wala ka nang kokontrolin sa sarili mo. Di ba? You get to fall in love, you get to get attracted, but you have to manage that. And even that heterosexual orientation has to be managed within the totality of your fundamental commitment as a person, isn't it? And so, in the same way, a person with homosexual orientation will have to deal the same way. Now, the question that some people are asking, like I was talking to a rector in Cebu, and he says, we do not admit them, we send them out right away. And the main reason for that is because they don't have facilities to process such individuals. Okay? And that If you put in somebody information work, you know, exposed to men all the time, that may not be a very healthy environment for somebody who has such homosexual orientation. So those are some of the arguments that are presented on the other camp. We will be able to assess that. But we were saying here that we had a facility and there are people who are able to process, individuals to integrate their total experience of their sexuality within the totality of their presence. That includes your own experiences in the past. There are some individuals, there are some seminarians who actually, in their own account of their sexual history, are able to discover that they have been wounded, that they are marked, that there are certain phobias because of certain abuses to which they have been exposed, okay, early on in their lives. So how do you handle that? How do you integrate such in the totality of your own fundamental commitment and option in life? Those are some of the important questions. Okay? Morality, as we said, is grounded in human and sexual experience and reality. And therefore, whenever we talk about morality, we cannot disregard that authentic, real grounding in the experience of who we are and what we have in terms of our own human sexuality. Okay? So that becomes the basis. Becoming genuinely human requires a serious consideration of the human experience, as we said earlier. Okay? And therefore, ethics should be able to adequately consider, okay, the total human reality within which a sexual human being can function. Okay? Something that we can never escape, but a reality that can always be with us. So morality is something that is beyond practicity. About sexuality, it's not only about what is, but therefore what we need to ask is what should be and how do we manage ourselves as persons of that. Okay? For